computers. This is Intelligent Performance.
Kevin, welcome to the Intelligent Performance Podcast. A pleasure to have you with us. A man of great experience when it comes to the podcasting world, and someone who I think is going to be able to school me on what I'm doing wrong and maybe even touch on a few things that I may be doing right. But welcome to the show, and like with anyone, I want to start with, what's your take on intelligent performance?
First of all, thank you so very much for having me. Second of all, do not sell me too much, because if I make a mistake, I will look terribly. My take on intelligent performance is, if you're going to do any level of performance, the best way to do it is the most intelligently. You can get a lot further if you're a hard worker. You can get very far if you're a smart worker. I think you can get the furthest if you're both. And I think that requires a high level of intelligent performance.
I love that. That's a great answer. And I think for someone you said just before we jumped on, 1,600 episodes on podcasting. I was watching a little clip about our man Rogan, who everyone kind of knows in the podcasting world and often admire to be him. He's done 2,500 episodes. And the way Jordan Peterson put it, is that he's done effectively 2,500, in-depth seminars about knowledge and different people. And I think that's a really great way to think about podcasting. I'm personally a huge advocate for this space. I think it's amazing. But tell me, what got you so interested in podcasting and even that you've now built out an organization which helps other people do it?
I found success in my mid-20s. I was financially successful in my mid-20s, even though if you asked anybody when I was younger, I do not think they would have bet $1 on me becoming any level of successful. But I realized that success wasn't really success to me. It wasn't fulfilling. I was traveling all over the place, and I ended up sitting on the edge of a bed contemplating suicide. So for me, I was so miserable. I was so lost. I felt like I didn't have a purpose. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. Coincidentally, my business partner, who was just a friend at the time, he had a YouTube channel, and he said, I want to interview you on fitness and mindset and discipline. And I said, all right, I don't know what this is going to look like. I've never done this before, but let's give it a shot. And it was a 2-hour interview. It went by in what felt like 5 minutes. And at the end of it, I said, imagine if you could do this for a living. If I could do this every day for the rest of my life would be incredible. And one of my buddies was there, and he said, well, there's people that do it. So I, very shortly after, I went and got the microphone, and I figured out how to do audio editing and eventually video editing. So for me, I've always wanted to help people. I've always tried to think differently and then share it with people. I just never really had the platform to do it. And then I fell in love with it. Eventually it got to the point where I started doing this full time. And then it was, okay, now we have to treat this like a business. And if I'm going to pay my bills, I need to figure this out pretty quickly. And it evolves. It evolved very fast. But the industry in a whole, and social media and the digital space, a lot has changed in since 2017 when I started this. It's drastically different than it was before.
What do you think has changed so much when you say that?
The failure rate is probably exponentially higher because the barrier to entry is exponentially lower. And I think there's a correlation between the ease of getting into something and how fast you tap out. So the competition amongst podcasters, it's not what you think it is, because sometimes you just have to outlast the other people around you. That's what I tell people all the time.
Business, right?
That is business. Somebody will come to me and say, I have a really good idea for a podcast name, but it's taken. And I'll say, did you look at the last episode that they published? No, I didn't. All right, let's look together. Oh, it was April of 2021. You're good. You could probably use that name as long as it's not trademarked or anything like that. So that's a big thing. And then the other big thing that I'm seeing is social media doesn't do what it used to do. You used to be able to get away with just repurposing content, and you'd get a pretty good conversion to the podcast. It doesn't really work that way anymore because social media is such a quick hit now. If you don't hook somebody in the first few seconds, they're on to the next thing. And it's really hard to do that from a podcast episode, but also make the podcast episode as valuable as possible without over editing and all that. Those are two of the big things. And then this would be another thing. And I'm curious for your take on this, for somebody who understands business as well as you do. Podcasting is becoming more accessible, and it's also becoming easier to make money. But I do believe that if you take the avenues that are provided for you to make money, it's actually going to hurt you in the long run. So, for example, there are a lot of platforms where you can get paid 0.004 cents per download if you advertise on your podcast. Yes, it feels good to monetize, but what if that actually stops you from having the creativity to do something that would actually make you a more meaningful amount of money because that money is good enough and it's covering my costs? I think sometimes when we roll something out for the betterment of people, it's really good because it adds a level of impact, but not necessarily the level of impact that you could do on your own potentially.
I couldn't agree more, actually, Kev. I think take this podcast as an example, right? This was supported by Venom Computers. They build high-performance notebook computers. The point of the podcast, though, is not necessarily to promote their computers. And anyone who's listened to the show is we, in fact, actually don't think I've ever talked about the product. And the point is, we're trying to build, like, if you think about Red Bull, what I love about Red Bull, they support teenagers cycling BMXs down dirt tracks, right? And they don't bang on about Red Bull and what's in Red Bull and how they manufacture Red Bull and how it's a really handy kind of convenient metal can and it tastes kind of good and this is the benefits of it. They don't do any of that. They just show the athlete drinking Red Bull very occasionally, right?
Yeah.
And I think from my understanding, they've really got that right, where they're focusing on the BMXing, they're focusing on people and trying to provide a good show around BMXing. And if you really like that, and then you could expand that to any other crazy sport, which they now support, F1, skydiving, jumping into planes. Like, I think they do an amazing job, like doing sport or kind of interesting thing first, secondarily by having a very profitable business in the drink space such they don't have to. But I think if you can copy that model, which is essentially what we're trying to do here, it feels slower, Kev, to I think, which is your point, right?
Yeah.
There's less direct monetization value, or I think, and that's what I'd love to talk to you about, it's really hard to justify the value. I think in the traditional sense, if you come from a traditional sense of, well, we're spending X dollars on this podcast and conversion, well, it's not that's a tricky and awkward conversation. I'm having that with some other clients as well. And so how do you navigate that piece? I think you're right in terms of the monetization piece, but what's the balance between, well, it's got to pay the bills at some point?
Yeah, it's always a tricky conversation because ultimately what you want to do in the short run, whenever it makes sense for you, is you want to delegate the things that are taking the time away from you building the business. So it's always a conversation of, you're 4 episodes in, you should probably just work through the hard yards and figure out the audio editing and the video editing and that type of stuff. Just do that for now. You're not ready yet. But what I always talk about is, if you have a podcast, let's say you have a podcast about self-improvement like I do, the easiest path to monetization for you is always going to be coaching. Always. A couple reasons. One, it's the most valuable thing you can offer. That's number one. And number two, you need far less people to make it profitable. So yeah, you could make a course that's $1,000, but I'm willing to bet if you charge $250 an hour, it's going to be easier for you to get 4 one-on-one clients than it would to sell one course. It's just the way it works. So it's usually the conversation of, if you signed up for a podcast because you think it's going to be passive income, you're probably not going to last long enough to actually get passive income from it. It's that weird thing. If the only reason you go to the gym is because you want to get abs for the summer, you might not be in the gym long enough to get abs for the summer. It's just, it's almost the why. That's really the biggest thing that I've seen. Yeah. I think what happens for a lot of us is we fall victim to, well, Joe Rogan just got 250 mil. I want to do that. Joe Rogan is just an anomaly of anomalies of anomalies of anomalies. Will that happen again? Yes. Statistically, is it going to be anybody that we know? Yes. Is it going to be me? No, most likely not. Just because something works at the top doesn't mean that's the way for us to get to our own unique top. And that's really, it's something I've seen. If you start because you want to do what everybody else is doing, I'm not telling you not to, but it doesn't mean there's not a different way for you to start making money or making impact or whatever it is in a quicker way. It's just different than what everybody else is doing potentially.
So what should people be aiming for then, do you think? If the Rogan is the anomaly on an anomaly on an anomaly, I really like how you
Yeah.
Where should people aim?
Probably, I would say the number one metric that I've seen that has led to success in podcasts is the number of one-on-one conversations you're having with your audience. If you could
Right.
only measure one metric, it would be the number of one-on-one conversations you're having with your audience. That would be number one. And here's why. One of the superpowers to podcasts that do the best are they have a very deep understanding of their audience. They know what buzzwords they like. They know what keywords they like. They know their top problems. They know exactly who they're talking to. So if you're having one-on-one conversations with your ideal client, your content gets better, your marketing gets better, your sales get better, and your conversions get better. You can kind of 4x your results with 1 unit of time. That's where I would focus. Oftentimes people say, what did you guys do in the beginning to get to where you are? I used to give out my phone number to listeners and I would hop on FaceTime and I didn't have anything to sell. I wasn't coaching. It would just be, it would just be, hey, Michael, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I appreciate it. What's going on in your life that I might be able to add value to? And we did that for so long. It was just that. A buddy of mine who had a very, very successful podcast and was very big on LinkedIn, he said, scale the unscalable. In the beginning, I think too many of us are worried about systems and scalability and email sequences and nurture campaigns when the thing that's going to differentiate you is the amount of time you put into one-on-one time with your audience. So if you can focus on that, I think that's the best customer experience that you're going to have. And a lot can come from those one-on-one conversations.
Interesting. It's like the Taylor Swift turning up to the wedding component, right? Where she shows up as a $1 billion, hot shot, and you're like, my God, like how does she find time to do that? But that's really the point. That's what actually wins her such close admiration from her families and potentially even, like, oh, imagine if Taylor could come to my wedding, that kind of piece. So very powerful. From your perspective, I'm just interested in your journey. Obviously, you haven't always thought this in terms of long term. What was the catalyst in changing your perspective so effectively?
I was so there was a time where we were maybe 3 years in, and my business partner and I, we had a studio. We were in the studio. And I said, dude, I'm making like $8,000 a month, and you're making like $3,000 a month. How do you have more money than I do? I don't understand it. And he is somebody who is just hyper long-term. He doesn't even care about today. Today does not matter at all. I was the opposite, where the second I made $1, I'd spend $1.10. It was just the way I was raised. I had a lot of scarcity around money. When I started to realize the negative impact that it was having on me and my financial stability, that's when I tried to practice being more long-term. And then honestly, there's only so many times you can have an expectation that I'm going to talk about this thing and then it's going to fill, or I'm going to sell this product and it's going to sell out, or I'm going to open up 10 new coaching spots and it's going to fill immediately, and it not happen before you start to realize, honestly, I should just worry about where we're going to be in 10 years because the approach isn't really going to change that much. I'm going to show up, I'm going to strap into this chair, I'm going to give as much value as I can, and then we're going to try to figure out what happens after that. So yeah, it was really just the disappointment of me setting such short-term goals and getting no return on that investment, and realizing it probably wasn't serving me to be as short-term focused as I was. I'm still the one who's productively paranoid in the business. I am productively paranoid. I'm worried about things that might go wrong, but Alan is thinking about 25 years from today. So luckily, Michael, I have a wonderful business partner who has strengths that I don't, and I have a lot of strengths that aren't necessarily strengths for him.
That's a beautiful framing around paranoia. I think it's latching on the word productivity. I think that's interesting, right? So that when you say productively paranoid, is that the mean like there's that kind of that urgency? Is that what you mean to that? That kind of inner urgency to get stuff done, to get things moving, or do you mean something completely different?
No, that it's as an example, we had a live event in January in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts in January is snow. I'm thinking of what's our contingency plan if there's a snowstorm. Alan does not have any clue about any of that. None of that is on his brain. He's thinking about the lessons we learn in this event will really be able to bring into the one we do 10 years from today. That's,
Mm,
I'm so short term. I'm worried about staying in business today. He's worried about having the most successful business he can in 10 years. And I can't take credit for that framework. Jim Collins, that's Jim Collins. One of his things is productive paranoia.
I love that. It's not a term I've come across, but it's a very powerful framing. Let's come back to the podcast piece. So if you're actually you've worked with lots of people in this space, so you've already mentioned they often get into it for the wrong reasons. So it's easy to get into. I agree. It's like crypto, right? You can quickly anyone can afford a 0.01 cent coin,
Mhm.
but it's very easy to lose your money on said coin. So podcasting is not dissimilar. If you it's super easy, everyone's got a microphone on their computer, so you can get started really easily. What are some of the other things that you see when it comes to people who are trying to, use it as a medium to communicate? Maybe they've got a specific message. What is it they're missing, or what are some of the other things which kind of trip them up?
The number one for me is time perspective. It's well, I've done 25 episodes. That's not that long. In the grand scheme of things, 25 episodes is just not that many episodes. You're going to
Mm,
get so much better as you go and go and go. So it's usually a misaligned time perspective.
mm,
That's a big one. It's the short-term expectations of not really knowing where you are. I was on a call with someone recently, and I think they're like 30 episodes in. And I said, "How many listens do you have total?" And they're like, "I don't even want to tell you because it's not many." And I said, "You're going to be fine. I guarantee you will have more downloads in your first year than I did." And they said, "No way." They had 3,000 downloads. I said, "Do you know how many we had in our first year?" I don't know, 10,000, 1,000. I think it was 1,054. Sometimes you're actually ahead of where you think you are, but if you don't think
mm.
you're that far ahead, you're going to feel like garbage about yourself. That's a
Yeah,
super
man, the
common one.
truth. Yeah.
And then the big one is really if you think the podcasting industry is the mechanism that's going to work when nothing else has, that's kind of the issue. You could do YouTube, you could just do social media, you could do a blog, you could write a book. There's a million different directions you can go in. If you've tried all those and they didn't work and you're thinking, well, podcasting is the sexy thing, that's going to be the one. I don't think it's any easier than any of those other things. It's just a different platform.
Yeah.
That's a super common one. A lot of people get confused on having guests versus doing solo episodes. That's something I see a lot. If you're trying to build your expertise, if you're trying to become an industry figure,
Mm,
sometimes having solo episodes is the way to do it
mm,
because you can sit down and you can say, all right, cool. My audience deals with these problems and these are the buzzwords. All right, cool. 3 ways to make more money podcasting. Boom,
mm,
that's my episode. And then I'm just going to talk about the top 3 ways to make more money. And then I can take that and I can create a bunch of micro content, share it on social media. Different approaches for different results is a common thing that I see with a lot of people. They think guests is going to be the way to monetization when it's probably not, or they
mm,
think solo episodes is going to be the way to listens when it's not as easy to get listens on solo episodes as it is guest episodes. So really
mm,
there's a lot of common mistakes that you see that
mm,
can be flushed out if you do it long enough and this would be the last one I'd wrap up with. A lot of the mistakes can be flushed out if you look at the data. But a lot of people don't look at their data. They don't they don't know that episodes that have a scarcity title of here's why your relationship is failing for some reason might do better than 3 ways to improve your relationship. It all depends on the audience. The audience determines what works and what doesn't. And if you look at the data and you understand your audience, you will be far more successful. I feel very confident saying that.
Tricky thing with this though, so let's say I'm a newbie in this space and I'm really passionate about sausages or something like that, right? And I've decided that I'm gonna, the Sausage Sizzle podcast or something like that. The audience, quote unquote, I don't really know who else is going to be that interested in that space, right? So it's really, you kind of start by feeling your way through. But you're saying, actually, like saying, if you've enjoyed this episode, call me. Is that kind of what you're saying? That if we kind of like reach out to me, I'd love to hear from you. What resonated with you? Is that the kind of level of detail you're kind of advising people to go down?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to give out your number if you don't want. Facebook group is a really good place to start. My thought on this has always been this process here. Always having a call to action at the end of anything you do is valuable, because you might just get some people who want to do it. Some people might just say, I'm an early adopter, or I'm somebody who doesn't have a lot of fear around making decisions. I'm going to give this a shot. But there's two kinds of calls to action. There's highest probability and there's highest ROI. Highest probability is I meet someone at a club and I ask them their name. Odds are they're going to tell me their name. Highest ROI is I meet someone at a club and I ask them to marry me. Probably not going to happen. The odds of that happening are just so low. I think it's the same with your podcast, where you get to the end of the episode and you say, hey, if you enjoyed what we talked about today on the sodium level in these sausages, and it just bugs you, you just can't get over the fact that they have so much sodium or not enough sodium, and you know that you're the biggest sausage lover in your group of friends, we actually have a Facebook group for that. Maybe you're weird because you have like sausage socks or you have a sausage light in your room. I can guarantee you in this Facebook group, you're not going to be weird.
You're going to be right at home. I love
that.
You're
going to fit right in. This is the Sausage Sizzle Facebook group. So it's just easier to say, look, if you found value in what we talked about today, even if it's not content value, maybe it's just feeling supported, feeling seen, we also have another place for you. And that's how you start to build the business. If you only drop one episode a week, what do people do for the other 6 days? They go somewhere else. They got to go somewhere else. So yeah, I would say, yeah, you can give them your email, have them sign up to a newsletter, whatever it is that you can actually add consistent value in. That's the next call to action, because one of the other common things that I hear a lot is I need more listeners. I understand. What you first need to do is get the 100 people who are listening to your show to listen to every episode. And the best way to do that is to nurture the current audience that you have. And the best way to do that is to have somewhere for them to go after they listen to the episode.
Very cool. So just closing the loop, basically. So if they are listening, it helps you understand that they're engaging with thanks for extending the metaphor here of the sausage sizzle. It helps you understand the audience by offering a kind of a call to action, a very soft one like that. It's not buy my sausages, it's join the Facebook group, reach out to me, message me, or something like that. And then that's then helping you to learn about the people who are engaging with your message, such that you can then serve them better moving forward. Is that kind of the essence of what you're getting at?
Yeah. You're staying in the ecosystem of this brand. And if you're going to make a purchasing decision in the next 6 months, it's most likely going to be in a brand that you're already engaging with. So it's that. That's how it goes from a podcast ultimately to a business. It doesn't go from a podcast to a business by just having one product and just promoting the heck out of that product at the end of every episode. It doesn't really work that way. But if you have a community, and then you have a freebie, and you have a social media page, and eventually you have some sort of offer, then you have the full ecosystem where you have your supply at the bottom, but you're creating demand throughout the business. So there's enough people to actually get the supply that you have ultimately.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, we have just started making this a video first podcast, right? So we've done it for a year. I think you're going to be something like episode 56 for us. and we've just started. I think episode 52 was our first video version on YouTube, right? We've always been recording the videos, but we've never really made it the focus. We went with an audio first, and that's kind of a big lesson for us in terms of we stuck it on YouTube. It was about a week ago. We got 1,000 impressions on YouTube, and we've got 68 listens for one episode, which we haven't. Like I hadn't even got around to promoting it yet. Now that's not a lot, but to give you that's just that performance alone on video first is better than some of the episodes which we've done more broadly. And I was like, wow. So I think, how are you finding video expands reach like that? Is that kind of an anomaly, or is that actually what you're finding more broadly? That kind of, because I was like, wow, there's an audience there on YouTube which I didn't even know existed.
It's very dependent from what I've seen. It's very dependent on the category of the show and the way they're doing it. YouTube is the second biggest search engine on the planet, where the podcasting apps are not up to snuff with searchability and virality yet. One of the first successful episodes we ever had was with a young lady named Bronnie Ware. Bronnie Ware wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Very successful, very well-known book. We had her on our podcast when she wasn't really doing any press. So every time you searched her audiobook, ours would come up. We were the second search, and it just got thousands and thousands of views completely by SEO. That's the beauty of YouTube. The other side of it is, if you're going to use the video to promote on social media, you might as well host it somewhere. If you're already putting in the effort, you don't have to worry about editing it up nice. Just throw it up to begin with. Just throw it up. If your podcast is something that is solving a lot of how-to problems, and your episodes are how to, how to fix a flat tire, hypothetically. I don't know if you do a podcast on that, but hypothetically, if that's what you were doing, that's really good searchability, where on a podcast platform, it doesn't work like that yet. The podcasting industry, and I tell people this all the time, Michael, it's the Wild West. You have no idea how many listens I have unless I tell you. You can't find out. You can find out if we've been on the top charts and all that, but you can see how many views a video has. You can see how many likes it has, comments. Podcasting is still very compartmentalized, where unless you build the community doesn't really exist, where Facebook is a lot more social. YouTube's a lot more social. So that's what I've seen from YouTube versus the audio.
Interesting. And what do you say to people who get a bit nervous around actually being on video? Because that can be a tricky one for a lot of people, right? They kind of they can't get over themselves, or staring at themselves is tricky.
Yeah, it's definitely. I completely understand, and I had a lot of that in the beginning. Maybe being on video isn't for you. That's okay. Yeah. I'll never tell everybody it's for them. I think you're probably leaving opportunity on the table, and you're leaving growth on the table, and you're probably leaving some level of success on the table. If you determine that's okay with you, then it's an informed decision. I'm all for it. But when I'm pushing clients to do that don't feel comfortable, it's usually, I know, and it's going to kind of stink for the first few, but I promise you, eventually you'll get to the place where you don't think about it. It's just, it's getting through the hard yards of that, and I'll be there every step for you. I can get on there with you if you want, and I'll record it with you, whatever. So just trying to support people. Find support. Find a level of support. And here's the other thing. Just because you record the video doesn't mean you have to put it up. So you can always record 30 episodes and then throw the 31st up on video and just can the other ones if you feel comfortable that way.
Stop giving away all the secrets, Kevin, which surely we would never do. Kev, been a really interesting insight. Just tell us, how do you actually help people? Like, you run a company called Next Level University. The goal there is to help people kind of from an emotional, physical kind of way to level up. Just tell us a little bit more about that side of what you do.
Yeah, so our podcast is about holistic self-improvement, how to level up your health, your wealth, your life, and your love. I have been somebody who was very in shape, winning bodybuilding shows, but my mental health was just not good. I've had really good relationships, but I've been very, very broke. And our thought was, well, what if you could have all of it? What if you could have your dream body, your dream relationship, and your dream bank account? The beauty of what we do is we try to take it down to like an identity level. I'm not just going to say, invest in this stock and this is how you make more money, because a lot of us have money blocks because of the way we were raised, or we have self-worth issues, self-belief issues. So we really try to dig into the root of who you are and how that is affecting what you get in life. So that's the podcast. And then from there, as we mentioned, we have different coaching things, group coaching, events, in-person events, that type of stuff.
Cool. And I think, just speaking to that piece, I think it is amazing the amount of value which is accessible these days for free. And there's a guy, Dan Abrams, who's this guy out of the UK. He's a researcher, he's a coach, he's a coaches into some of the top Premier League sport teams in the UK in terms of psychology. And not a guy I would normally engage with, but man, some of the research, some of the conversations you get to kind of dip your toe into these worlds where, you don't have to sign up for a psychology degree, pay 30 grand and then you realize after 1 year, this ain't for me. You can dabble in these different things. You can throw in, if you're curious about self-improvement, just quick flick into your podcast, 2 episodes in, you can work out whether Kevin's the right guy for you, or whether it's, or whether this whole world's not for you or not, right? It's super incredibly accessible, maybe overwhelming. Do you feel like it's gone too far yet, Kev, actually, in terms of that choice?
This is what I've seen. It's very hard to figure out what content is valuable, because the content that gets shared the most is usually the most controversial, not the most valuable, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a weird time where we stopped having guests on our show. We were getting to a very high level of guests. And my business partner and I sat down and we said, I don't think we should have guests anymore, because here's the thing. I can talk to someone for 45 minutes about their expertise, but if I ask them a question outside of their expertise, they are going to give whatever they're going to give. It might be the best feedback ever. It might be the best answer ever, but everybody's going to take it as gospel because they're so good at the other thing they do. And you start to cross your expertises, and that's where things get wonky. And we're seeing that in social media with nutrition experts who don't know anything about nutrition, and business experts who don't know anything about business. So I think the accessibility is amazing. I think it's absolutely amazing. But with a lower barrier to entry content, you have to have a higher understanding of what's real and what's not. And then here's the last thing I would add, just a tip. Don't be afraid to give away your best stuff, because you were just saying, Michael, there are certain channels or podcasts that just give away so much value. People are still going to want to work with you. If you give away so much value, they're going to appreciate the value. And there's going to be some people who say, I need to work with this person. Don't be afraid to give away the best stuff. Don't be afraid.
I love that. And just to that piece, Kev, because I think that comes back to monetization, right? That can be a very nerve-wracking piece. How can you be so sure that that's the right advice?
People are going to work with you because of how much you help them before you help them. You have to have a level of trust. It's not, well, yeah, I came across your social media and it was decent, so I figured I'd give you $10,000 to see what you can do behind the scenes. It just doesn't work that way. It's usually, I came across this post and I just felt super spoken to, and I feel like you can see me. I feel like you understand me. What offerings do you have? And then that's a conversation. Yeah, that. We're not in a place anymore where you can really hide your stuff. You got to put your stuff out there, and if people find value in it, they'll find a way to work with you. That's really. Now, is it going to be as easy as everybody says? No, I don't think so. I think it is. It's harder than it's ever been to convert. That's my belief, and that's what I've seen. So I don't want to stand here and say it's easy, just do it and it'll work. It's going to take a lot of time for sure, and it's going to take tinkering and data, but give away your best stuff. I think the reputation you build will definitely help the business.
Yeah, I love that. Peter Crone, I'm not sure if you've come across him. He's a coach. I think he's an Aussie coach, but he lives in the US. And I was just actually been super impressed with some of his videos. They genuinely help you prior to you engaging in his service offering. He's kind of a higher end kind of coach, so you kind of feel really grateful that he's made that available. And I think that's really powerful. And then he's got his free course on his website. I was so moved by some of the stuff on there. It was wow. So just amazing what you can do do I think it's kind of prevented me from working? Nah, for sure, no.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think has it made me a stronger advocate? Hell yeah, in terms of that piece and talking about him right now as a fanboy. So
Yeah.
Kev, well, I think that's a great place to leave the conversation. Thank you so much. We're going to link to the Next Level University on the show notes here. It's going to be on YouTube as we're now a video first podcast. And I think your insights have been invaluable. And actually, what I'm going to do, I'll be brave. I'm going to ask you for feedback on this episode, such that, because I think other people could learn from what I'm doing. What would you say? You're a coach in this space. How would you, what would your advice be to me for someone who is an advocate, which other people can learn from too?
You're wonderful. You're a wonderful host. Your ability to what I call pull the string is very, very high. You're a great active listener, all of those things for sure. I would say start more with a stronger story. Oftentimes, people don't really care what they're hearing unless they care about who they're hearing it from. I'm sure you've heard the messenger, or the message is only as important as the messenger, or as good as the messenger. Starting with story is always really good because it helps people see where you've come from to get to where you are. But not all podcasts should be in that format. Depends on how you want to highlight the person. But I would say you're definitely well above the curve in terms of your camera, in terms of your setup, in terms of the way you ask questions, just in terms of your ability to host a podcast. You are way ahead of the curve, my friend.
Kevin, it's super constructive. Thank you. And
You're very welcome.
I think it's some of the best guests I've heard or I've had ask for feedback. Some of the best hosts I've come across ask for feedback. And I think what I was trying to demonstrate there is that if you look to learn, for those who are out there thinking about doing this, that's how you get better, right? And Kevin, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it very much.